Welcome to Martial Wisdom. Here you can listen to conversations on all kinds of topics related to martial arts. In today's episode, we're going to discuss Aikido and Grappling. Joining me in this discussion is Stephen Scott. Two major things that I want to mention before we get started today. First, I want to express my heartfelt thanks to the listeners who have donated through the PayPal tip jar. Your contributions are greatly appreciated. It's the love of the martial arts which keeps us doing what we do, and at the same time, it's true for producing the content that I do on this channel. Thank you very much for your support. Second, it's been several years now since I launched the Spirit Aikido online program. Releasing new videos every few days over that time has resulted in a very large library of material. As of the recording of this podcast, we are nearly 350 videos in the program. This is a great way for you to get training and practice ideas which I've gathered from my own Aikido training, gleaned from other instructors, and taken from other arts. In the latest series, I include videos on using different parts of the body for atemi, including the head. I also cover hair grab defenses, as well as a couple of techniques where Nage initiates the contact. If you've been curious to see breakdowns of how I approach my Aikido on the mat, the videos in the Spirit Aikido online program are the best way to go. You get a great deal of content and help support the show at the same time. I encourage you to check it out. There's a link in the description. I hope you enjoy this episode. Now, on with the discussion. I want to welcome my friend Stephen Scott back to Martial Wisdom and Martial Aikido's podcast. It's great to have him back. And last week I talked with Oliver Martinez about integrating striking training into Aikido practice. And now I want to talk about integrating grappling in. So Stephen came to mind kind of to the top of my head because he's got such a great grappling background. And it's not something that is very common. In fact, I'd like Stephen to kind of go into that. So welcome again, Stephen.
Yeah, thank you, Tristan. No, always a pleasure. Yeah. So yes, essentially, I first started out doing grappling way back, like a lot of people when you start out as a kid in judo. And that kind of eventually led me into some of the more striking martial arts, which were more cool at the time. But especially more recently, the club that I trained in Aikido in was actually a mixed club. So we did a little bit of jiu-jitsu, Aikido, and all my instructors were graded in that. But specifically, we also, I'm one of the few instructors in Scotland licensed to teach Norwegian Laustak Glima, which is essentially Scandinavian wrestling, which lends a very different and very unusual slant onto your particular type of training. And if anyone ever gets the opportunity to do any kind of form of wrestling art, I don't mean WWF style. I'm talking about like Greco-Roman catch wrestling, anything like that. Even collegiate wrestling, I think you call it in the US. Mm-hmm. If you ever get the chance to do that because it is one of the greatest levelers out there. And you suddenly realise what is efficient, what is inefficient, what is energy management, and what is extremely exhausting just in the first 15 seconds of any kind of wrestling bout. It's extremely exhausting, and yeah, it uses every single muscle in the body, and it forces you to stop and have a good long hard look at yourself, as we say in Scotland, once you're done. Particularly when you have to pick yourself up off the ground time after time after time. So yeah, it's that type of training for me personally can only benefit your Aikido practice because it is 100% contested from the instant it begins. There's no break, there's no back off, there's no back in the old days. Well, I still teach karate and I teach it to the kids. It's very easy to dominate a karate bout by backing off, using the room, using the area, getting a breather for yourself, getting your wind back. In Glima has a very simple theory, is that you engage, you can't turn away, you must keep engaging, and the one who hits the ground first and is separate from their partner, i.e. you get your opponent on the ground or you get your partner on the ground and you break away from them while they're on the ground, you are the winner. It's purely a combative
almost
stance.
Has something in common with sumo then, because isn't sumo
extremely
getting one opponent to touch the ground with something other than his feet?
And absolutely. Yeah, that's it. Any part of it, when you're down, you're down. It doesn't have to be the flat of the back. It can be flat on your face. It could be on your side. you'll maybe get a couple of warnings. You get a one knee warning. You can go down to a knee once. You go down to one knee twice, and basically that's it. The game's over.
Sure.
And it comes from the battlefield, where traditionally you don't want to be rolling about on the ground with someone while horses are stampeding past you, and hairy men with spears, or hairy women with spears, let's face it, Scotland, are trying to stab you while you're down there. And, if you get the upper hand and you're holding someone down on a battlefield, you've got a few seconds before someone realises you're trying to drown one of their friends in a puddle of horse manure, and then you get a spear through your back. It's not long before it happens. So, yeah, the rules in Gleeman are simple. Get down, engage, break away by any means possible that's not biting or scratching or clawing. You can use nerve attacks. You can not drop an elbow in, but you can place pressure through the elbows. You can put a knee on the side of someone's head if you want. Anything you can do to try and keep them down while you break away. And if you get out of hand's reach and they're still on the ground, that's it.
Sure. Well, one thing I wanted to cover to kind of launch this, because I've run into some pretty heavy arguments about whether Aikido was grappling or included grappling or should have grappling. In my opinion, Aikido is a grappling art. And and that may kind of get some people kind of upset, but if you classify hand-to-hand combat as being essentially like one of the three original Olympic arts, which was striking, which was Pygmachia, and from what we know, their striking was elbows, forearms, fists, feet, knees, anything you want to do impact with. That's one like group of skills. And then the grappling, or the pane, which was the wrestling, and the grappling, which is another set of skills. And then the third one was the pancration, or they called it all powers. It was you could strike, you could grapple, all of it. And to me, in my mind, that's a pretty good delineation of the combat sports, if you will, or the combat arts. And so I think if I were to classify Aikido into one of those, especially contemporary Aikido, I'd say it's pretty solidly in the grappling realm, especially for those people that don't want striking within Aikido, or they don't believe it belongs, or it's not there. It's certainly not trained very much. Every Aikidoka that I've ever come across, their striking comes from something else. They did not learn it in Aikido. They learned it from another source and then blended it in with their technique. And therefore, that's why I think that even putting it in the pancration realm, which is everything, is a miss, because Aikido tends to lack that striking element. And I know I've tried to fill that hole within my own training and within my dojo, because I want my students to understand striking. I want them to understand how striking integrates with grappling. But if you take, purely what Aikido is known for, which is throws and locks, all of that to me falls in the grappling category, because it's not striking and it's not combined striking and grappling, really. And I think Aikido in more of the form that Morihei Ueshiba did it, probably belonged more in the pancration realm than in the grappling realm, because he employed strikes.
Yes.
As far as we know, and did not discourage the use of strikes either. It's not like, I don't think he went through a phase where he said, okay, I'm going to take striking out of my art. I think it was always there. And that's fairly evident. So for those people that say, no, Aikido is not grappling, if they think of grappling as being Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, of, being twisted up on the ground, then no, Aikido is not that type of grappling. But by using your body, essentially manipulating somebody else's body, that to me defines grappling. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's anything that, the very first thing that we deal with in Aikido for most of us is someone grabbing you. You grab my wrist, I do a technique. And it either happens from Gyaku Hanmi or I Hanmi, most likely from I Hanmi, because it's easier to do things like Ikkyo, for example. So yeah, I've maintained that for a long time as well, that Aikido is, I also get looks, because I also say Aikido is kind of a mixed martial art, which it is. It's got elements of quite a few things, particularly if you look back on Ueshiba's early Aikido days and his Ueshiba Ha Aikibujutsu days, where there were elbows, there were punches, there were all sorts of things going in. And this was all obviously pre-war Aikido as it was now called, but it wasn't back then. And a lot of what he taught was much more rugged, much more basic, and would fall firmly into that pancration style attitude, where it was the striking was when if you ever read any of the early commentary from any of those early door students, a lot of his students didn't need to be trained to punch because they came from other striking arts or jiu-jitsu arts. And when you look at some of the old footage of what Ueshiba used to do, a lot of people think it was pretty brutal. When you compare it to what you see now on the internet for Aikido, it's a completely different ball game. And if I'm honest, I kind of prefer it, the kind of older style of it, because I think it's more pure, raw in its form, and it's more of a concept than a collective rendition of what people believe Aikido should be. I don't think O-sensei himself knew back then where he was going with this, and you see elements of Daito Ryu in there, you see elements of striking arts, jiu-jitsu, all of that is still in there, and it's still pretty raw, but he's trying to do something with it.
Go ahead.
So I was just going to say, so I think as well, he would have had the same attitude, as that where we're putting strikes in, I'm controlling them through direct hand-to-hand manipulation. And that requires we make body contact. And by making that body contact, I will use whatever means are necessary to engage with and neutralize my opponent. And that's what it came down to. And you cannot neutralize anyone without grappling, because they're not neutralized until they're down and under control, or they're completely immobilized or laid out. And none of that kind of really, the more modern take on Aikido there, if we take out those strikes, the only way you can immobilize them, if you can't lay them out and you can't incapacitate them by damage alone, the only way you can take them out is through grappling forms. That's it. That's the only way that Aikido, modern Aikido, for the most part, can be seen as being effective, if it's a grappling art.
Absolutely. One thing I was contemplating this last week was, because I've heard the same thing that you were just saying, that the people that came, the martial artists that came to Morihei were mostly advanced martial artists or martial arts trained athletes of some variety or other, whether they
had soldiers.
Yeah, or soldiers. They had some kind of sumo, they had judo, karate. Now, what I've never heard was, like, roughly, did he get more? I think he got a lot of judo practitioners, but I don't know by what percentage, like how many roughly karate people compared to judo. But judo is also a grappling art as well.
Completely, yeah. We also know that Kano did send students to Ueshiba. That Kano himself went and looked at what Ueshiba was doing and declared that as a solid Budo art, and we definitely did send students there. So you may find there was, and that may be to fill in the blanks in what he perceived was perhaps missing from judo, which was an interesting thing when you think about it. Why Kano Sensei would send students to Ueshiba it was obviously to learn something.
Absolutely,
so there was, and that allowed, this is going to sound terrible, I think that allowed judo to remain pure in its sport form, but to also fill the blanks. So what were these blanks that were being filled?
Exactly. And that's that blank thing comes into play. And I wanted to touch too on the breakdown of, if you get a striker, you kind of have two choices. You either have to prevail over them by being a better striker than they are, which that always has been a danger to me. Of, you don't try to play the specialist game. You have to do something that they are not ready for. And one of the things about grappling, and this kind of comes back to the ancient argument over, do strikers prevail over grapplers? Is striking, I shouldn't say the athletes themselves, but is striking superior to grappling, or is grappling superior to striking? And I think you hit on it there, is that by grappling, you can you have a better chance of taking the striker's tools away from them by tying them up and make them have difficulty with striking. Take a kicker off their balance, they have a hard time landing with power. You close in and wrap up a puncher. Now they have a hard time using their tools, and that is kind of the beauty of grappling. And I think that that's the advantage that Aikido at least had. I mean, obviously, I think we both agree that much of contemporary Aikido has been kind of watered down to the point where it's arguably ineffective because of just how it's been trained. But to look at, like you said, the older Aikido in its more pure form, I think is a very high level, highly skilled and highly proficient level of grappling with light contact. And I think most arts go through this. I've seen judo go through this. If you look at a young practitioner, they're young, they're powerful, they're fast, they're athletic. They use a lot more strength than they need to. They use a lot more collision than they need to. They don't mind overpowering somebody with pure athleticism or physicality. But you take that practitioner, if they keep going after, in their 20s, when they're young and vigorous and full of juice, and they get older and they realize they want to pursue efficiency. They want to do their art with the minimal amount of effort. They don't want to use athleticism because they get older. They're not as athletic anymore. They're not as fast or explosive or powerful. And now they use cunning. And I think the best example of this is watching like Olympic judo versus watching Kyuzumafune do judo. Like it's almost a different art. Because he is on a sublime level of skill, and I think that's probably where Morihei Ueshiba was. He was grappling, but he was so far ahead of his opponents that it seemed like he was just not even there. But the concepts he was using were all grappling concepts. You were controlling somebody's body. He just had such skill that he was doing it without really having to use a hard touch or using a lot of strength or anything like that. That's how I.
Absolutely. I completely agree. There's two concepts that I spend years and years and years trying to get into my students. And the first one is, don't control your partner, control yourself. You control yourself, you control your partner. And the second one is economy of motion. Whether that's that you continue to practice and you practice big, then you bring it in tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter as you go, or you make your movements more efficient, where a lot of the stuff you did when you were younger, where we all like to do big, massive movements and then hurl each other across the mat, you suddenly realise, hey, wait a minute, I can still put them over there with 1/10 of the output on my part. You start to realise all that. And you only do that, again, getting back to that grappling concept, you only do that when you stop and look at what exhausts you as an individual when you try to control someone, and how that affects your body as you get older. So it's I've found that, interestingly enough, I've done Glima matches where I've thrown someone with a toe from the ground while they thought they had won. Because as they stepped back, I just managed to get a hand under their foot, and literally my index finger hooked underneath their big toe and lifted it as they stepped back. And it was just enough to get them off balance to the point where when I pushed, they fell over and I was able to get up, and I won.
Nice.
Because of a toe. Right. Now, if I were younger, I would have probably thought, if I were younger and able to get off the ground easier, if my hip didn't give me so much trouble, rather than just pushing my hand up and hoping the toe would catch, I would probably have tried to grab the foot, hold on to it, and what I would have done was just pulled them back on top of me, and it would have gassed twice as quickly. But I didn't. And it's those kind of silly things where you think, yeah, there's something in economy of motion, and there's something in controlling your natural impulse to get out there and just engage, at 500% of your effort. You can do it in a better way. And I think that's one of the things that Aikido can teach us. But in order to do that, you need to have an uke, or a partner, who's not just going to run around you, jump in 5 circles, and throw themselves away from you when you wiggle a finger. You need an uke who will work with you, and that's why I prefer to use the term partnership, because you're both testing each other all the way through the techniques. And when you look at Aikido, I don't like to look at it when it works. I like to encourage my students to get it wrong. And now where do you go from here? And what you find is you have 2 independent bodies in very close contact, one in a compromised position, usually the person trying to do the throw in the first place. How the hell do you get out of that? Because you've now compromised yourself by not controlling yourself, and you now find yourself into the first thing that most people will do if the person trying to throw them is compromised is they will reach out and grab them. Because it's the easiest way to immobilize someone is to literally pin them down and shut down their hands, shut down the legs. And we all know this from school days. Someone comes up behind you, they never just grab you from behind, they grab you from behind and then place their weight into you.
Right.
And the monkey brain kicks in, because then you can't lift your legs, your body's overbalanced, your arms are pinned, and you're in a full-blown grapple situation at that point. And that's one of the most compromised positions that you can be in, because your weight's off balance, you've got their dead weight moving into your thighs, you can't kick, you can't move your arms. Where do you go from there? And that's some things that, for me personally, I see missing in modern Aikido. It's all about mid-range strikes that are ineffective, met by mid-ranged interceptions that are less than effective, that somehow produce this wonderful, magical, flowing art, not technique. Let me rephrase that, not art. It brings this wonderful, magical, flowing agreement that I'm going to move you here and you're going to jump for me over there, then I'm going to swap with you. And I've said this often before, as long as people are willing to do that and accept that's what they're doing, what you're doing is ballet with a throw. That's fine. If you're happy with that, do that. But please do not put that out there as a martial art, because it's not. It is an art. It has no martial concept. It's not a martial art. I'm sure the god Mars would disagree with everything to do with that, being as that's where the word martial theoretically comes from, the god of war. So it's a kind of getting that concept across can be very difficult. And wherever I go now, whenever I do an Aikido course, I always throw in a little bit of Glima as well, because, as I say, it's a great leveler. It's an absolute great leveler. Everyone, a lot of martial artists walk about and they think they are the proverbial part of the dog, which I'll not mention just now, but it's a very Scottish phrase. And they think the best. It's well, I'll tell you offline. I don't want to be saying anything too bad on the show, but a lot of people walk about as martial artists and think they can handle themselves, and then I like to throw in a little bit of Glima, and I usually put a black belt with a white belt. And what I usually find is the white belt, having less training than the black belt, defaults to natural ability. The black belt tries to enforce their superiority on the white belt, and the white belt in a wrestling format kicks the crap out. Because the black belt's trying to be all this, I'm all zen with it, look at me, I'm so in one with myself, I'm so wonderful. And then all you see is this charging mass of across the mat, take them down, and then, head goes down, legs go up, and it's usually quite humorous. We forget that in doing a martial art, we still have to be able to stand our ground, we still have to be able to work. Ironically, if the higher grades would just engage with that contested concept and turn, they've got perfect kokyu-ho there. But they don't. As soon as the arms go for them, they start to panic, because it's not a mid-range ineffective attack, and it's not a mid-range ineffective grab, and it's not a telegraphed movement either. It's just a body charging at them, Sure. And 9 times out of 10, if they just move to the side and stick their foot out, the white belt's going to stumble over them. If they just get their Mai done, right, it comes out. And that's where I go with it after that. I show them, look, you've got all these skills, but you're not using them. You think you're using them in an agreed situation, but as soon as we put the slightest bit of pressure on it, it crumbles. And I don't do that to make people feel bad. I do that to ask them to consider why you're doing it. If you're happy with that, then be happy. But if you think the way you're training is going to save you if something kicks off and you are forced to use these skills, then be happy with what you've done. But open this new door and look at how can you bring this to bear over here. So you've got 2 sets of skills to call upon. Don't be afraid to look through the open door. It's there, you can do it.
Yeah, and something I found very valuable and learned years ago was, and this was a great demonstration by a friend of mine, fellow instructor, and he said, and he'd come running forward with his arms flailing. He said, if your martial art can't deal with that, it's really not a martial art. And I would say the same thing of somebody walks up to you, gets within, bad breath range and grabs you and tackles you. If you can't deal with that, you've got just a giant hole in your art. It may be great at doing other things, but those are the two most common in watching all kinds of videos and watching how real fights go. Those are probably the two most common attacks. They're not smart attacks. They're not disciplined, but damn, they're effective. And they happen, people get pissed off. Those are the two that happen the most. And
have you seen the old Aikido News video, Rendezvous with Adventure?
Yes, I have.
Right. Do you remember the part in that where Tohei engages with the big American?
Yep, I do.
And that almost becomes a wrestling match.
Yeah,
and Tohei ends up with his hakama all ripped and everything. But that's the thing that comes to mind as soon as anyone says to me that Aikido is ineffective. Well, it's not, because that was an untrained man who was, let's face it, probably about 50 pounds heavier than Tohei. And Tohei does go to town on him a little, but he does get him under control and he does put him down. But he doesn't do it through conventional Aikido.
Correct.
He does it by using Aikido principles.
Tohei had a grappling background when his previous athletic experience, so he kind of tapped into that. Now, there's some things I've heard about that sequence or that event, and that was that Morihei told him, "Don't hurt this guy." Yeah. Now, that said, would we see any wrist locks or nikyos or what have you within there? Or I think the thing that would really more than likely would have hurt him is something like a shomanate or a head throw that would have slammed him hard.
Exactly.
Which, as we both know, is a great technique against somebody who's bigger than you, especially taller. But still, it was pretty clear to me anyway that Tohei wanted to keep it fairly sporting, but you could tell it was pretty spirited. You get a big guy who wants to take you down. That is a serious consideration. You can't toy with that, even if you've got good footwork and good movement and good body discipline. But it won't look clean and like a demonstration.
No, it doesn't. And if you were to take that situation and transplant it now onto what we see as mainstream Aikido that gets a lot of the footage, it would be a very different ending. Because most of the Aikido practitioners would not have the skill, capability, and self-control to control that situation without hurting that gentleman the way Tohei did.
Right. Well, and this never occurred to me until just this moment when you talked about this, because I remember the demonstration that Morihei was invited to give by the emperor, and he originally wanted to decline with the saying of, well, if it was a demonstration, I'd have to show you something that's false. It would only be a demonstration. If I really showed you Aikido, I would hurt or potentially kill somebody. And he tried to have the graceful exit to the challenge, but the emperor insisted, even though the emperor wasn't there, it was for his representative. Morihei went ahead with the demonstration, and then the attacker that came out, he wound up breaking this attacker's arm. So I wonder if that film, that Rendezvous with Adventure, was subsequent to that, the last thing Morihei wanted to have was on film this guy getting his arm busted or hurt. And that may be why he said, "Don't hurt him." If he did say that. Now, I didn't hear it. Obviously within the martial world, there's all kinds of rumors. You're never sure exactly what's true or what isn't, but it's plausible to me that he would say, for the image of this art, don't hurt this guy. But we can see what happened. And the guy was a kind of a big galoot, but he was persistent, and he was Tohei. It's not like Tohei just kind of flipped him around with a little bit of hand movement. He had to work for it.
Oh yeah, he worked for it. He definitely worked for it. And it was scrappy, and it was ugly, and it was fabulous. Because it was so scrappy and ugly. And it's a moment in those old footages when you see O-Sensei doing all this stuff, and then that happens, and you're like, ooh, oh, that actually felt kind of real. Everything else didn't feel that real, but this kind of felt real. This kind of felt as though, that could be how we could utilize this. And that's something that stuck with me for a long time.
Sure.
And made me think about it is that Aikido is a very functional, very useful martial art. But it's more, as I said earlier, about how you control yourself to control your partner, and whether that's using extension, the unbendable arm stuff, which sounds really airy-fairy, but anyone who knows what I'm talking about knows what I'm talking about. It's just using proper biomechanical manipulation to prevent yourself from being weakened while maximizing on your power output.
Sure.
That's the way I use all this unbendable arm and heavy body type thing that you hear about. And it's about making sure that, I'm not light, but if someone tries to lift me, I don't want to be jumping into my toes to take 6 stone, 8 stone off my body weight. I want to drop it and make sure if they have to move me, they have to move all 14 stone. Let's call it. No, I'm 17 stone. I don't look it, but I'm like a hairy square. Sometimes I'm a bit as wide as I am tall.
Sure.
And getting me lifted, I've got a really low center of gravity as well. So I use that when I'm wrestling, when I'm grappling, when I'm doing Aiki, and I use that to my advantage all the time.
Well, I think all Aikidoka realize that gravity is probably our greatest ally. Like we want to use it both for our protection, like you were just describing, as well as for manipulating another opponent. We want to have them be fighting gravity, not using it like we want to use it. And that's where I think most grappling and wrestling arts have that integrated with them. They want to use gravity in their favor, make sure that they have the weight advantage on their side. And one thing that comes to mind as I was thinking about this when I heard Ellis Amder give his kind of the parallel definition of a temi many years ago, because I was always taught when I came up that a temi was a strike meant to take balance or to take posture, and that's how we always used it, and that's how I've heard every Aikido practitioner use the term atemi. And he described that there's an alternative definition, which is atemi is the striking body, meaning that any part of your body can be used to strike, to take posture. And I thought, okay, well, that's pretty cool. I mean, it's very Japanese to have multiple definitions for one word, right? But as I thought of the ramifications of that, I started realizing that if you look at things like catch wrestling, even old school dirty boxing, where you're using body bumps to start knocking somebody and to take their posture, that's exactly that definition of atemi. And it took me looking at grappling in a whole new light, especially as I started learning and I was getting taught how to do it, that things like body bumps, head nudges, using your shoulder to move and shift a head or shift a shoulder or shift weight onto a leg, all of that stuff falls within that definition of atemi, is using your body to strike and take posture, which upsets, as we know, that's Aikido. If there was one prime principle, it's take the other person's posture. And so you're just using everything that grappling has used for thousands of years to do exactly that.
In my old club, there was a couple of techniques that we used to do. It was the 80s and the 90s, but they were acceptable. One of them is to do shihonage. And as you get through to shihonage, where you have your hand up and their arm locked, is you make a seesaw motion with your left leg on the ground and swing your right leg back, and you take out their legs as you're doing it. Now, kids, don't try this at home. You only need to take one leg. If they're on your right side and you take their right leg and you seesaw that as you're going, you then start a kind of body of motion so that your natural body weight swings from being, you keep in front, you swing your leg, you swing it back, and it's almost like a cross between shihonage and uchimata.
I was going to say it has that uchimata flavor with that leg swing.
Yeah. And make sure there's plenty of toilet rolls around for your rookie, so they can clean up afterwards, because it's a hell of a throw.
That wouldn't be a ride I'd like to take, because the end would be
pretty trust bad. Me, it's not fun. It's not fun, and it's like when you do the half shihonage, so the arm's really twisted and they're down at that level, you do it from there as well. And I've had that done to me a couple of times. So quite literally, you're uchimating them through the shoulder. joint
Sure.
based on the pressure through Shionagi.
Mhm.
And it's hell on earth.
Sure.
But then you get up and you're still alive, and it's okay, and you never want to go through it again until the next time. But those are examples of atemi as well. And for example, when you're doing Ikkyo and you get them down into Ikkyo, I see this everywhere. Everyone pushes with the shoulders left and right, zig and zag, left and right. That's not how we do it. We treat the arm as a spear, and you move your hip in and you dislodge their hip with your hip to knock them to the side. So you actually use your right hip as a body check into the soft part of the ribs. So it compresses the rib on the left-hand side if their left arm's extended. So you're compressing the rib, you're winding them, and you're taking them down. That's how I was taught to do Ikkyo from an early age. Well, from an early Aikido age, anyway. But these are all atemis. So the atemi can be part of the movement, just as you said, just exactly like that. It does not have to be, this is an atemi, it's a punch to distract them.
Right. I guess that's one thing that frustrates me is when I see atemis as just being, I throw a fist up to somebody's mouth and that's really all an atemi, or to the body somewhere. And because what I found with opening these body atemis up, they're more powerful, and they do a much better job of taking the posture without doing things like potentially harming your fist, because you have a fist going to where the skull is armored. The bone will hurt. And in modern day, if I hit you in the mouth, your tooth might actually tear my skin. I don't know what you got diseases going on in your mouth. I don't want to be getting any of that business. But I throw a shoulder into your ribs with the lung right behind it. I can get you to not only take your posture, but I can get you to get short of breath, because I can drive all the air out of at least one lung for a moment. That's a huge effect. And I can also, usually because of my height, but even people that are not very tall can do this, I get to lift somebody up off of their feet by doing it correctly, which I really like. You get somebody up in the air, and the next thing they're going to do is they're coming down, and they're coming down again as my ally. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. James Brown was right. So it's it's one of the things I teach, and I teach karate as well. A lot of people don't really know that, but one of the things I always teach is that there's no such thing as a feint. If you have to, I don't mean feint, I mean a feint. If you're going to do a feint, it's only about 20% less effort than actually putting the strike in.
Right.
So do the strike. And if they don't move out the way, great. You hit them. If they move out the way, it's a feint. So you get the same effect, but it means something. And for me, atemis are the same. When we do atemi in class, for example, we're trained to, not with a fist, but just with the flat of the hand, make contact, even if it's just on the side, and heavy, not slapping or hurting, but just kind of heavy contact. Get used to actually making that thump happen. And this, I'm going to pull this back to Glima again in a second, just to tie in this same concept, because that heaviness can then become a movement, and that heaviness is that contact we use in Aikido. Aikido fails when we break contact with our partners. When we move away, they get their balance back, they're upright, they're ready to go again.
Yeah, you got to start over.
It's a restart. Control-Alt-Delete. We're back to square one. Only now, in a real situation, they're a bit pissed off that we're back to square one. When you enter and you strike or you connect and you stay in contact and you transfer your weight through them and continue to do so, that's where your atemi comes in as well. Because I see a lot of people doing these little flicky atemis. Oh, that's to distract you. Was it? so fast and so flicky, I didn't even see it. You barely saw it. The camera barely saw it. It was that stupid. Whereas if that had actually connected and I flinched, getting that flinch reaction is worth way more than 500 small,
and that's one
flicky things.
I'm glad you brought up feints, because in my experience with feints, firstly, it's like a distraction. You have to sell it. You have to, like a magician that wants you to look at this hand because the magic's going on in the other hand. He has to really draw you into looking at that. And if you're either burning the hand that he wants to use to do the trick, and you're not falling for the distraction, then your distraction doesn't work. And feints are the same way. And one of two things will happen. Either you get somebody that is either drunk and they don't notice anything. And by the way, any magician will tell you they don't like performing for drunk people.
Yeah.
Because they do not follow misdirection. You can't paint their eyes. You can't draw their eyes very easily because they're just, they're in the drunk zone, right? And then you can't oversell it. If you have somebody with a somewhat experienced eye and you oversell it, he knows it's a fake. He knows what's going to be real or not. And that, I think, holds right to what you said of if you're going to, a feint should be a real strike because you have to sell it to somebody who's experienced. And if they're so oblivious, they don't notice, you better land it with what it needs to land with to finish it. That you can do. And I wanted to add a third one in there. And this actually reminded me of old school boxing back to the days of Dempsey and even farther back to Marciano.
You mean proper
yeah, and because this crosses over into what we're talking about with the body atemi is that, and they would say of Marciano, like he hits like a freight train, but he misses a lot, like he's poor discipline. Well, what had actually happened was he would swing, and if he went past, he would actually continue the strike with a forearm, which became illegal after he was doing it because he was hitting people in the back of the neck and knocking them out. But if they flinch and follow, you keep following them and you're going to hit them and you're going to take their posture. And even in boxing, you take somebody's posture and you're raining down on them, you're going to win. Like they have to get their posture back if they're going to continue striking at you. So the two universal principles you talked about are not just wrestling principles. They are stay engaged, keep posture. Once you take posture, keep it, don't back off and restart. Those are striking principles as well.
Absolutely.
Once you take that posture, you have the advantage. You exploit the advantage, whether you're doing it to submission or control, either way. But that's how you prevail.
And you've just hit on a really important point, and something this is what makes Aikido effective, provided people train in it. And what I see a lot of, they don't. And it is an opponent can go faster forward than you can backwards. Anyone who's ever done any striking art, any wrestling art, when your opponent's coming at you, you either have to drop and hit them and stop their advance, or you have to try and get them past you, or get on top of them and get them down, or deflect, defend, and get under their guard. You can't afford to start backpedaling, particularly if you're in a restricted ring or a proper circle or a square or whatever you're in.
Sure.
Whether you're doing karate, whether you're doing boxing, you've only got limited space before you run out of space. And if you're on the ropes or in a corner, you're in trouble. You know, corner's not so bad, but if you're on the ropes, you're on the ropes. That's where the phrase comes from. You're in some deep doo-doo at that point because there's no limit to where these punches can come in. Now, in Aikido, we do something that is incredibly different from every other martial art out there, and it's Irimi Tenkan. We should never be going backwards when we can turn.
Right.
And it's one of the things that I hammer home all the time. When we're doing partner work, and even when we're doing pressure test work, anyone who starts moving backwards, they're basically beat. You can see it straight away because they've only got limited space to maneuver in. Irimi Tenkan, or just basic Tenkan, means that you're constantly moving circularly sideways, as opposed to trying to do linear back and forward. And I found when I incorporated that Irimi Tenkan movement into my wrestling, suddenly everything became Kaiten Nage. Everything felt like Kaiten Nage. They come at you, they try and grab your leg, you turn, you drop your weight on it, their head's down there, you turn, Kaiten Nage, you're facing the same way, bit of a pressure onto their back, grab their head, take them down. Everything becomes Kaiten Nage, Irimi Tenkan style movements. So or for anyone who's not understanding the Japanese, just turn and throw. And that brings us right back onto what we were saying earlier about the white belt chasing the black belt. All he had to do was Irimi Tenkan, or just turn. Turn. And they could have just grabbed a hold of him and threw him past him. But they don't. They panic and they try to regain composure by finding that safe space. Because they don't, a lot of Aikidoka nowadays, they're not used to working in that close zone. it all starts out at distance. And it doesn't even start in striking distance. I even see it with Bokken now. We always start with Bokken crossed at the tip to achieve a proper striking distance. And nothing makes you move like someone coming at your head with a stick. It really makes you move. I'm not saying we're trying to hurt each other. It's just a very good incentive. It's a very, very good incentive, actually. I highly recommend it. But when you start 8 feet apart, even for beginners, I just get them to do it slow. Just move really slow, but get used to the threat. Understand the threat is there. Because then when it comes to your hand techniques, you're no longer afraid of that closeness because you had that closeness with a weapon. Now you can get closer again still with the hands. And then everything happens within grabbing range. And yeah, it is one of those things that I try and instill in everyone. Aikido is a grappling martial art. Don't pretend it's not. Don't think out in the street someone's going to come at you, you're going to grab their collar and throw them. They might fall over because they're blind drunk, but you've had to grapple them to do it. Well, I was going to say nobody falls over on their own, but they might. Someone swings a punch at you, you drop, and you get under their guard, you elbow them in the ribs, and then you come up to the face, and you basically perform Sokumen Yuriminage. You're still grappling them to do that. You're within grappling range. You might find you've grabbed their belt to get a bit of a boost in and take them down, but you've still grappled. Anything where you have to take hold of someone, that's what you're doing.
Well, and looking at a lot of how argumentative confrontations work, people get close to each other. Maybe there's a shove, maybe there's a clinch, you get into a grapple, which I think that's judo's got that locked down all day. They do so much with the grip work. But the great part about the grapple is if you come and you shove in on me and I do an arm drag and I get around behind your shoulder, now I'm not getting hit. I've now taken, if this escalates from shoves or some hand contact into strikes, I've now gotten onto your flank. You're going to have a hell of a time trying to hit me from there. And I've got attached to on one arm. So if you try to go for a knife or a weapon that's in your belt, I've got a hold of your arm and I can feel it. And I'm going to get in the way of you doing a weapon draw. So to me, those are all testaments again to the grappling side of me as the good guy, if you would, grabbing hold and connecting to the assailant in a way that helps protect me from the immediate strikes, but also what we always have to be worried about is a weapon coming out.
Oh God, yeah.
And those are all layer stuff. Yet again, that a sport fighter never has to deal with is that weapon coming out because they don't have them. But nowadays it seems like weapons are getting very prevalent, and not just pocket knives and stuff either, but all of those things. I think that's even greater testament to the utility of grappling, because you can get in close enough, and you get to that flank. I can even run a hand on your belt and feel if you've got a weapon in there, we're grappling around because I'm temporarily safe, once I get there for maybe a second until you start to turn. But if I drop weight on you and I make your feet heavy, it's going to be harder for you.
That's it.
Like all of that stuff is a great advantage. And that's something that's hard to take away from a striker. If you're at range and they're quick on their feet and you're trying to slow them down just by trying to strike them, that can take a while. I mean, unless you're really talented, outstrike them and out.
Or lucky.
Yeah, or lucky. Yeah, exactly.
Or lucky.
And I think that the other great thing that grappling offers is the ability to, how would be a good way to turn this, to influence time. You buy yourself time by slowing that person down, by tangling up with them. And if they're not used to it, they'll get very confused and they won't know what to do. And I think, and at the risk of pissing off a lot of the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu fans, the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu hit because at that time when they did the first UFCs, martial arts were so heavily compartmentalized, and most of them did not have any grappling background. They had no idea what to do when somebody came in as a grappler. And I think you could have put, instead of Hoist Gracie or any of the Gracie family, if you would have put a top wrestler in there, he probably would have done the same thing to all of those fighters that Hoist Gracie did. Because a grappler against a striker that does not grapple, is there's a miss there. And really that grappler, all he's got to do is get past one of those strikes and get in and close, and he's in his world now, not in the
Oh yeah,
strike.
yeah.
Now,
I mean, the
to be
Gracies.
fair, people will probably say, well, yeah, but what about Ken Shamrock? Because he was a grappler and he was in the first UFC. But if you look into it, there was a lot of shadiness about how they changed things up on him at the last
I
minute.
was just going to say that. Yeah,
Yeah,
there were rules
because I
put
think
in
I
there
think
by the.
I think Shamrock had the best, by far the best shot at dealing with Hoist, but they said, well, you can wear your shoes up until about 5 minutes before the bout, and then they said, no, you can't wear your grappling shoes. So, which, granted, I think Ken Shamrock was probably the most well-rounded martial artist in the whole original UFC, like first couple of them. But that's yet another discussion for another time. But all those other competitors were primarily strikers, or I think they had the sumo guy in the first one, right? I don't remember.
I think so.
But big dude,
Big dude.
Yeah, he was freaking huge. He was like a planet.
He was a big dude. Yeah.
Yeah. And to his credit, I mean, Royce Gracie did do a great job of handling his opponents. Like, he was highly skilled, and I would say that Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, to their credit, they were doing something in that time between, the late 70s or 80s, when they really said, okay, we want to turn this into a streetwise capable martial art. That was something that other arts were not doing, and I think they should have. I think that they did do a great job of saying, hey, listen, let's not have all these holes, and be studying a tiny little subsection of the art that we want to do. We want to be able to handle all of it, and they should be applauded for taking on that mentality.
I have never met a BJJ, a dedicated BJJ practitioner who's not a good scrapper. Without a doubt. Striking, maybe not so much, but closing people down, getting in range, folding them up like a piece of origami, first class. And I've learned a hell of a lot from guys who do BJJ.
Absolutely.
Not because it's different from what I've done, because, as I say, I kind of, my Aikido, Jiu-Jitsu, martial arts experience, I grew up through the ranks in a mixed dojo, so we did a little bit of lots of different things. And the Jiu-Jitsu aspect we did was more traditional. And what the Gracies did is they took elements of judo,
right,
mixed it up with some of the concepts of
Jiu-Jitsu based art.
But yes, ultimately what they ended up, and I don't mean any disrespect by saying this, was a more diverse but scrappy form of judo. That's extremely effective when you're at a position of disadvantage. That's for me, that's its one downside. It requires you to be the person at disadvantage for the most part. It's great from the ground. I've trained with people, I've taken them to the ground, I've thought, got you now, you little git, and then they've wrapped me up like a Christmas present. And it's very humbling. You're like, haha, I have you now. What, whose arm's that? That can't be my arm. It doesn't go at that angle. Oh, it is my arm. Where's my leg? That kind of thing. Fabulous ground fighters, really are, and nobody can take away from them. And yeah, the system that they've built up, a grappling art in itself, it's taken a lot of they kind of, I'm going to go out on a limb here, and it'll probably make me sound really stupid, but they kind of did with grappling what Bruce Lee did with striking and everything when he formed Jeet Kune Do. They took the best elements of lots of different things and shoved it together into this thing. My only complaint is, why is it not the Brazilian word for jiu-jitsu?
Why is it?
Because it's called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, so why isn't it the Brazilian word for jiu-jitsu?
Oh, sure.
It's my only grief with it, is that why don't they just call it the Brazilian word for jiu-jitsu? But of course, that's marketing and labeling for you.
Yeah.
I would love to know what the Brazilian words for, the gentle way were, or the gentle art. I would really love to know that, to know what its actual Brazilian jiu-jitsu name is. In Portuguese, sorry, yes, Portuguese. There you go, that shows my ignorance of languages. Sure. It'd be interesting to know what it is in Portuguese. So it's, I'm Scottish, we can barely speak English.
Well, in looking at BJJ and wrestling both, because I've integrated aspects of both into what I do, and I've worked with a wrestler more than I've worked with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but just breaking down the pluses and minuses. And as you say, I think the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, and I realize they're not exactly the same, but the thing that I like about them is when they get on the ground on their back, they know it's not over.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Like a wrestler, once you get on your back and you're pinned, that's the end of it. Now, but I've also realized that being on the ground on your back is a horrible place to be, and you never want to be there if you can avoid it, and you need to get the hell out of there as quickly as possible. And this is where I think the wrestling approach, where you want to be on top, that is an advantage position, is more of a that's why I prefer wrestling over Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, because I want to be in the habit of being on top. And wrestling does train to get out from underneath, to switch positions, to take the top position, but that's ultimately the top. Or that's the ultimate goal, is to be on top, especially weight on the lungs. That's another one of my favorites, is making it hard for the other person to breathe, right? Where I think wrestling, its rules tend to overlook it, is they don't mind giving up their back. And that's where I think the rules of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu with the choke is so important. I think wrestling could be even more potent if they integrated a choke position as being a winning position. And and that's how I've had to adjust wrestling, and the wrestling that I got of, we want to make sure, just like a BJJ person, make sure you never give anybody your back, because you're about a second and a half from it being over if you ever do that. But I think they're both bring a lot to the table. They have a lot of great stuff to offer. It does kind of warm my cockles a little bit when I hear how BJJ people tend to dislike wrestlers overall, because they give them so much trouble. It's kind of just a fact that way, but I do like that wrestling part.
It's actually, you hit on something really interesting there, and really important, is that a lot of BJJ guys will sacrifice their front to protect their back.
Right.
They'll literally, they will turtle and go on their back to protect the back while you're trying to engage the front. And that's really important, because even in if I'll bring it back to Glima again for a second, which is my wrestling experience. In Glima, it's the engagement isn't over when you're on the ground. You're trying to use your partner to get back on your feet. So your partner isn't trying to pin you like in other forms of wrestling. Your partner's trying to get away from you so his friend can stab you with a spear. Okay, or his friends can start piling in. Your defensive position, therefore, is to want to keep engaging from the ground. So your partner, the one on top in Glima, is trying to disengage. The one on the bottom is trying to re-engage and stay engaged. So it's an interesting position to be in, because they're trying to get away from you. All of a sudden it changes. The person who gets thrown onto the ground, normally they would be wanting to break and get away. In Glima, you're not, because by the time you turn to break away, the bout's over.
Okay.
You want to keep engaged. So I'm a ground fighter in Glima. I want to keep engaged, and I use my upper body strength and my natural 14 stone. I use my natural body weight to hang off people. So quite literally, the more they try and get away, I'm kind of like I'm going to disgrace myself here. I'm kind of like the Blob, and there's Steve McQueen. I'm trying to get my way up their leg and keep moving.
You all octopus on them.
Yeah, that's the word. Yeah, that's a better word. Yeah, I'm a bit like an octopus. So it's just trying to wrap them around with legs and arms and everything. So it's a totally different concept for that type of wrestling, and I think it brings a lot back to Aikido as well, because it means that when we do that type of training, just because you throw someone doesn't mean they're down and they're out.
Exactly.
We keep trying to
and one of the things I want to point out too, and this is one of my favorite, it became one of my favorite things a few years ago, and that is to make it's not just a physical atemi, it's a mental atemi. You want somebody off their game and scared. And I tell you, if you octopus somebody and they want to get away and they can't get away, and it just gets heavier and heavier, you talk about it demoralizes somebody very, very quickly. Not as quickly as pushing the air out of their lungs and not letting them breathe. That happens within seconds. But when they want to get out and they start panicking, like that's total mental. You've gotten that atemi. That's of the mind. And grappling, you can do that with striking, I think, only when your opponent realizes he's helpless to stop you from striking him. only then does that panic start to roll in of, oh my God, I'm completely in over my head. And that takes an extraordinary level of skill to strike in such a way that even if somebody's defending and moving and trying to evade, that they can't stop you from striking them. And to me, I put that as advantage slightly towards grappling, where it's real easy to take somebody and just make them freak out because you've gotten their arm, that arm turns into a body lock, or into, you capture a leg, you start getting into a horse collar where they can't look up, and they, suddenly they feel all, locked up.
I found,
connected.
Yeah, absolutely, Tristan. I found there are a few types of individuals in the martial arts world that can still maintain their grapple and striking, who usually work on more than one attack at a time. First one is boxers, who, unless you, what I want people to remember is a strike is a movement towards a grapple. That's how we look at it in Gleamer. If you're going to strike, it's a strike towards a grapple. So what's your intent after you strike? What are you going to do? Are you going to keep striking? Because that becomes difficult. Because when you hit someone, they either stagger back or fall, or they start to move to avoid to get hit again. So the strike should feed into something else. Immobilization for further strikes, or immobilization to take them down. When you're dealing with someone like a boxer, you have multiple fast, heavy strikes. They don't have the grappling skill, but they can take the damage and they can keep coming. It's a bit like a tank. The other one that other couple of guys I've trained with who can incorporate both really well.
Boxers are used to getting hit. They don't freak out.
That's it, exactly. They don't freak out when they're hit.
Yep.
The other ones I've found who combine a lot of this really well are Muay Thai fighters.
Oh yeah,
they are solid. I mean, I'm not talking about Tong Po or that type of thing. I'm talking about, like, these are small guys, really fast. They know how to hit and grapple at the same time, and they're not afraid to grapple while striking and using different parts of their body. And it's really, really efficient for that. And it's for me, that's the problem, guys. If I ever had to get into a set two with anyone, I wouldn't really want to do it for too long against a Muay Thai fighter, because they've got that capability to lock down your grapples and keep striking, and they're very agile with it as well.
Yeah, I'd say Muay Thai is probably the best modern example of a combination striking and
pancration type thing.
Yeah. Granted, they don't get into groundwork and things like that, or heavy duty throws, but they do some throws in the head plumb, the horse collar, or the collar tie. So they've got enough grab. By the way, old pugilism, like 17th, 18th century, had a lot of that. It was almost a combination of wrestling with the dirty, what we would call dirty boxing now.
Yeah. There's a fella I used to train in Wing Chun with, and he was developing his own investigations into old school pugilism, because he found a lot of similarities between the postures and the movements in Wing Chun. And the grapples in Wing Chun that linked back to old school pugilism. Unfortunately, I moved away because we used to have some really good conversations. And he was a really good chiropractor.
What they say, we only have two legs and two arms in the same body, so fighting is going to be fighting. You're going to see similarities all over the place.
Yeah, and that's one of the things he was doing, because that's something he found as well, was that link between that ability to old school grapple and fight at the same time. And that's things we all used to do in school.
Yeah,
you'd grab and hold, and well, I tried not to, but
sure. Well, one of the things I've been working on lately, integrating more, and I've included some of the stuff we're talking about on my online program, but working with my wrestling friend and some of my senior students about getting into that almost like a pummeling type situation where it's chaos. It's basically a randori, like a wrestling randori, where you're trying to get into those positions where you can turn it into a solid lock, into a throw, into some sort of control. And using a temi, and I was playing around with this just last week, of rather than striking the head, I just put my hand on somebody's face and turn their head away. Even turning their head, much less, taking it up like you would for a shomanate. But just having a paw on somebody's head and turning their head is incredibly effective for getting around to their flank. Because if their head's facing you and you step, they will very easily take a little turn, and you're still haven't turned the corner around them. But if you come over and can turn their head, it's very easy to slide behind their shoulder, and they can't really resist it because the neck is not strong enough to push against the arm. And it's a great control. It's something you can do at low intensity. You're not knocking any teeth out. You're not hurting either your hand or their face. But it's a great manipulation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, it's if I ever make it over, I'll come over and do a wee Gleamer course for you because I think you'll love it.
Oh yeah, that'd be great.
Slaps and strikes are allowed in Gleamer. You're allowed to slap, not like a total shut up kind of slap. You're allowed to slap and push. So it's interesting when you're wrestling that you can make physical contact with a push. Sure. You can put your elbow into the nerve clusters in the body. You can get your elbow up and grind it into the body. You can manipulate the wrists a little and things like that. So it's much more combat orientated. But even so, what you were saying there, that slap when placed against the cheek turns the head. When put against the side of the ear, suddenly becomes a really effective atemi.
Oh yeah.
Particularly for the people that behind it.
And I understand this, that while I don't want to do striking because I don't want to hurt anybody. Well, if you just push, it's just a push. If you put some juice on it and impact it with with the bone, turn it into a bone strike, it can be stunning. You can even knock somebody out, but you can use the same movement, practice the good body mechanics to deliver your body power to push the body and manipulate it. But all you're doing is exactly what Aikido does, which is manipulate the structure of the body, take the posture away, start folding things and bending over and tipping, and then let gravity do the rest of the work.
Absolutely. See, one of the most effective strikes that I've ever experienced, and it was a couple of months back, and I was reaching down in the house. I was picking up a ball, one of the dog's balls, and the puppy ran towards me, spun, and she smacked me with her ass on the side of my head. And I poleaxed and I got up and I fell over again. I was actually stunned. And it wasn't a heavy strike. It had momentum and power behind it because she was just spinning. And penetration, yeah, definitely. And it was the right strike at the right moment with me at the right angle, just that it rang my bell.
Right.
And it didn't take a lot of power. And that's where the martial training has to come in. Because
you should have your dog teach some classes.
We should do, yeah. Oh, trust me, she's nearly popped my kneecap out at a young age as well, because she just spins and hits the side of your leg. But it's just excitement. She's really happy. So I try to be really happy when I slap people now. It helps.
That's a lesson to write down right there. Be happy and slap people.
If I can bring it back to Gleamer, we call Gleamer the game of gladness, the game of joy. So you should always be happy when you're slapping people. But that's where the technical aspect comes in, and something that's missing is we hear people talking, and I see a lot of people doing demonstrations, and I go to courses and they're like, we're going to hit here, and then you're going to hit here, and you're going to do this. Yes, against a stationary target. Give them a moving target, and all of a sudden that accuracy goes right out the window. Being able to place that technically correct strike at the correct point to maximize its effect is a skill we need to work on. Or we do what, as you said, Marciano did, you learn to go past your strike and use something else. So if you miss with your palm, engage with your shoulder, you have to learn to do that. And the only way you can do that is by practicing, by looking at where you err in what you do and having that contingency plan to do that. And that's something I think a lot of people, I think a lot of us as martial artists, we're afraid to look at our failure points to any great extent. We do it, and look, when people learn kata and things like that, there's a difference between forgetting a kata and looking at a failure point. And I'm going to bring this back to the BJJ guys and the wrestlers and the grapplers here. Grapplers don't. We want to know how they exploited our failure point so we can't fall into that trap again. Absolutely. In a lot of martial arts, we pretend those failure points aren't there. And you need to own up to that. You need to own that void in your skill set. And that's, I say this to every martial artist that I ever see. Look at where you're going wrong. Look at what you fail at. And honestly, open that door and have a good, long, hard look into the void.
Right.
Because what's looking back at you is what you really need to be dealing with. Is it your pride? Is it arrogance? Is it hubris? Is it anything like that that's holding you back? Why don't you want to? I've gone to some places and I've had instructors. Do we want to do a wee bit of training? Yeah, well, I don't train anymore. I've got an injury. Right, that's fine. But some of them just don't want to train because it's seen as though you're below them.
Right.
I don't train with white belts. I don't train with blue belts. I only train with black belts. So what you mean is you only want to throw people that know how to be thrown.
Sure. And I want to build on that concept because, the idea that, and I agree with you, I think there are a lot of martial artists out there who are content with their knowledge base and they don't care if they have holes in it. And to me, it's, you have to have an answer. Somebody wants to, hey, let's train together. Let's play around a little. And he's a grappler and you have no answer for grappling. What are you going to do? Now you have a hole. Now, the only thing really to do is to say, well, I don't play around with grapplers. I don't play with wrestlers. I don't play with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guys, or I don't do with Wing Chun, or you pick your art, whatever it is. It's like, if I think a real martial artist would be able to say, yeah, let's play around. Let's do something. And to show that you at least have an answer. You don't have to prevail over a specialist in their own art, but you have to at least look like you know what you're doing, and to have at least something to answer for that they can walk away going, okay, this guy's not a pushover. This would be hard to,
It doesn't have to win over them. It just has to neutralize it.
Correct.
So it's if you're sparring and you're training, for example, you're training a Muay Thai guy and he comes in with a head clinch. What the hell do you do?
Yeah.
Okay, the first couple of times you take some shots, and then you think, okay, do that again, please. I want to know what I can do within my art to combat that movement.
And I'm glad you brought that one up, because there's another one that came to mind too. But for me, I have a great deal of respect for Muay Thai fighters, but also for the audience, realize a couple of things that are illegal in Muay Thai competition. One is driving forward several steps when you've got the clinch. The second one is
you've got
double leg takedowns and body locks are not legal. Well, once you remove those from the rule set, now that head plumb is a dominant position. But if you open up to the stuff that grappling does, it's not a dominant position. It's not a great place to be. You don't want to hang out there. But if that double collar tie comes in and you drop and you body lock them, their knees are not going to be the weapon that they were a moment ago. And you can dump them or pick them up and slam them down like with a body lock. And
what a lot of people forget, sorry to interrupt your flow there,
no, go ahead,
is that very often when you get locked in like that, the safest place to be is as close to the incoming strike as possible.
Absolutely.
Because it lacks momentum and it lacks force at that point. The closer you get to the point of where that strike erupts from, the less damage it can do to you as you get there.
Yep.
And again, that's where wrestling and those types of grappling arts come to the fore.
Yeah, absolutely. And the one that came to mind, usually that comes to mind for me with this, is how do you counter, X? And that, to me, the answer for the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu style of they lay on the ground and they want to wrap their legs around you is leg locks. And because they've admitted, leg locks kind of take a lot of the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu game away. And I think it was, I may be mistaken this, but I thought it was John Danaher that said that as soon as you introduce leg locks, about 80% of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu kind of goes out the window, because you can't lift your leg up and give it to somebody, or they're gonna lock it, twist it.
They're going to take it, yeah.
They're going to take it, and I like that. I like knowing that, because leg locks are not that complicated to learn. You learn some leg locks, and now you can deal with a lot of the BJJ game. And the other part is the wrestling part again. And I've played around with some MMA BJJ guys, with their specialty. And yeah, if I'm just kind of playing around, they're gonna wrap me up like a Christmas present. But as soon as I started putting weight on the lungs and stuff like that, and it kind of got to a stalemate position, but I wasn't just completely at their whim of being folded up. And so, there are things that you can learn to counter their specialties if you just learn what they are and train them and practice them and test them enough so that you get comfortable to know what not to walk into, such as, extending your arm straight against BJJ on the ground. Like you're going to get armbarred in New York second.
Yeah, yeah.
But those are all, to me, fundamentals that a martial artist would understand to know how not to fall into that trap. You spot what you're dealing with, the type of fighter or type of attacker you facing, and then know, all right, I'm not going to fall for his, top 5-10% meat and potatoes stuff. I need to respond to it.
Yeah. And this also brings us round almost full circle to where we were when we started the conversation as well, because it's understanding that it's not about looking for that supremacy in what you're doing. It allows you to recognize those types of attacks before they commence.
Yeah.
Because invariably I've had critics over the years who've said to me, why are you teaching Aikido against roundhouse punch? Why are you teaching Aikido against baseball bats? Why are you teaching Aikido against knee strikes? We don't do that in Aikido. And so they can recognize it.
Right.
Because you can't defend against something you fail to recognize.
And when I hear that, I don't want to fill that hole in my skills.
That's exactly what it is.
I don't want to, and to me that it's puzzling to me how anybody could even say that. I mean, I know
for me as well.
Yeah, but
you've not done Aikido until you've done it.
What are the odds you're going to run into somebody who's a capoeirist who's going to be flipping around like a monkey on the ground of kicking you and whatnot? So okay, maybe you'd say, well, I don't need to go find a capoeirist to train against what he can do.
But clearly you've never been drunk on a Saturday night in Glasgow.
Well, clearly I have not. It could very well be.
I've seen someone fail at that, and I swear to God, it looked like capoeira, but it wasn't. He was just trying to stay upright.
But to say, a roundhouse punch or just a straight kick or, or just a grappler, somebody that, and it's probably, I would guess it's similar in a large part of the world, but I know here in the United States, we've got a lot of people in high school, they go out and they play maybe football for a year. So they learn how to run across the field and tackle somebody. Maybe it's, there's rugby, or just guys that grow up with brothers and they're just running around tackling each other. Like that's a real attack. And if you don't know how to deal with it, it'll lay you out.
And it's actually something you'll see a lot if you go looking online, and I know all these Aikido versus MMA things are all the crap, and most of them are fake just to dismiss Aikido. But at the end of the day, the most attacks I've seen is someone in a hakama, who I'm convinced has never worn one before, gets their leg lifted. They run at them, lift their leg, and that's it. Fight's over. They basically put them down and go to town on them. And you're absolutely right. It's one of the first things that we ever learn as kids. If you have a brother or cousins or whatever, you're standing, you're doing something, you're looking at an apple tree thinking, how can I climb up there and get that apple? Then you hit from the side and your cousin's on top of you slapping your face, and it's like, these things happen. You've just got to learn to deal with them. But these are fundamental skills that we all have. Absolutely. And we tend to forget. I think as we get older and as we get more settled into our martial art and we become comfortable, I love that word used earlier, it's about comfort. For me, the martial arts is supposed to be about stepping out of your comfort zone. And you might get angry, you might want to cry, you might feel sad that, you don't have these skills. Well, grow up.
And I'm glad you brought up that term comfort zone, because to me, it's when you step out of your comfort zone, really what you're doing is you're making your comfort zone bigger. It's getting bigger and bigger, and more things fit in there. So you're not taken out of your comfort zone by somebody who's like, I'm going to show you something you never even seen before. And that's, to me, ultimately what I want from my martial art is to not be the fish out of water, or the guy drowning because I'm way underwater. I don't even know what's going on. And that's why I like cross training so much and getting exposure to these different things and filling in all those holes that, by priority, you do them by the stuff that you're going to have the highest likelihood of running into. That's where you'd start, but just make sure you're not caught with I'm not going to train against that, or I don't want to deal with learning how to do this other thing, or,
What I've found invariably as well is that when I do that and I expose myself to other arts and how they do things, I then always bring it back to my Aikido practice. And then I realize that a lot of what we do in Aikido can cope with these types of events, but not if I don't know how to cope with it. And it requires an adjustment. It doesn't require me. Yes, there are some voids in Aikido. The most blatant one is groundwork.
Right.
But that's only because we don't do groundwork the way BJJ or Judo do groundwork or Jiu-Jitsu do groundwork. You can still apply Ikkyo from your back.
Mm-hmm.
You can still apply Kotegaeshi from your back. You can still do a reasonable ateme and any sort of neck throw from your back. You can defend yourself down there. You can still utilize Irimi Tenkan movement. You can use Tai no Henka movement. Someone reaches for your shoulder, you can lock their shoulder and throw your weight round and circle yourself, and you end up pulling them over and off balance. You can use these skills, but not until you learn to apply them out with that upright 360-degree format. Mm-hmm. Almost everything we do in Aikido is applicable, but not if you don't apply it. It needs itself to be applied. It needs pressure applied to it to see how it functions.
And it's not obvious too. By the way, one of the things that I'll often do is when we start class, I'll start with Hapa Undo, the 8-direction exercise. Mm-hmm. And everybody gets, and I was the same way. You get used to turning to face a certain wall, and you see the things in the corners.
You turn them around,
and then you start them 90 degrees, or you start them off in a different direction, and they just get all disoriented because they're like, I'm not used to. I'm used to using all the things I see as my index.
That's right.
I think the same thing holds true when you go from being good at something vertically and then you turn it horizontal. Like you've lost a frame of reference, and that's why. Mm-hmm. I don't think somebody needs to become, like, let's say they spent 5 to 8 years becoming an expert in their martial art. You don't need to go do that to learn the fundamentals of the ground. You could do it in a short amount of time, because you don't need to become, a semi-pro grappler in order to have those fundamentals work for you. Mm-hmm. At least that's been my experience. Now, the more you learn, the better more comfortable you are there, and the less surprised you're going to be when somebody pulls something that you've never seen before. That's thoroughly understandable. But those fundamentals, and I love that you used that word a moment ago, because really we're talking about the fundamentals of hoplology, the universal principles of hand-to-hand combat, of human combative behavior, and they're not specific to an art. And this is, I guess, kind of my gripe about arts in general, is that a martial art tends to exclude certain universal principles for the sake of its little subset of what it likes to do. And the arrogance that comes in, and the hubris, is when a practitioner says, my art's got everything I need. I don't need anything that's outside of my subset of martial arts. I don't need to do grappling because I'm so powerful that I would. And strikers tend to be like this. And I'm not going to call out a particular art because it's so common amongst them, of saying, well, nobody will be able to tackle me because I can hit them in the head so hard that they'll be knocked out and they can't take me down. Which I think anybody could, with a brain, could say that claim is absurd. Like, you could knock somebody out, but if you ever tried to knock somebody out who is charging to try to tackle you, and have them do it 100 times and see how many knockouts you get. I would be surprised if somebody got more than 5.
Oh yeah, I'll be surprised if it was that high. I mean, I'll be honest.
It would be that high. Yeah, and much less against anybody who is a rugby player, a wrestler, who can take a shot, because you got to hit those people hard before you ring their chimes and cause a brownout or a blackout. So if you're that arrogant to think, well, I can just strike, or I can just fill in the blank, and I don't need to worry about, dealing with leg takedowns and tackles and the stuff that happens, much less, crazy flailing arm swings or overhand rights, or the stuff that happens in, pubs and street fights all the time. To me, that's like, boy, you better have that hole filled. Every single one of those holes better have a lot of stuff in it, because he might need it.
And invariably, you just reminded me of something there as well, is that often it's not even an effective punch that lays someone out. It can just be a wild swing. And I hate to say it, it might even be directed at you, it could be somebody swinging at someone beside you,
Yeah.
then misses and
Right.
takes you out the game. I was also thinking even a good strike in the side of the face is enough to ring your bell and take you down. If you just got to look at those slap fights that you see.
It's funny.
That's insane.
I was one of the first things I was shown about 15 years ago by a couple of friends that had a strong real world violence background. Was they said one of the things, and they've seen this happen more than one time, is you get the flailer, right? And comes flailing at guy B. Guy B jacks him and knocks him out as they're approaching, gets knocked cold, but their swing follows through and hits him on the back of the head, knocks them out cold. They both go down on their back. And then the guy that was flailing wakes up and gets up. He's like, yeah, I kicked his ass. He was completely unconscious when that arm made contact. Like there was, and it said it's ridiculous looking. It's absurd, but this is the kind of stuff that goes on, that really happens. And, even if Guy B was a total, like an accurate boxer and he landed that thing in clean and tight, but that flailing arm, you got to count for it. It's just funny. Anybody who looks at fights and ambushes and assaults that are on video, you just see how absurd and chaotic they tend to be. And to me, that's where the grappler stuff can mitigate a lot of that flailing business. Dropping low, getting underneath, because all the flailing attacks are usually aimed at the head.
They're mostly aimed at the head.
You drop level and you close in and dump somebody. And
but even from an Aikido perspective, Tristan, we shouldn't be waiting for the attack to come to us. It's not like, it's. We used to see this a lot in soccer, and it's where, certainly, as you know, as a Dallas Cowboys football fan, I'm used to seeing it as well, where that ball gets pitched downfield and there's nobody on the end of it because they're not actually moving for it.
Right.
Although we've got Dak Prescott, he can't even get it downfield. But or he can, just not on
FedEx
anybody.
or something.
Yeah, arrives a week late and it's been kicked up and down. It's broken. But one of the worst things that you used to do as a soccer player was stand and wait for the midfield to kick the ball to you so you could do something with it. You have to be in motion to intercept the ball, whether it's soccer, whether it's football, even in baseball. If the ball's moving, it's not going to. If everybody in outfield stood there waiting for the ball to come, it'd be a pretty boring game.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? With nobody moving. And it's the same in martial arts. We have to be able to understand the simple concepts of, if we remain static, we're a static target. The chances of you moving into a punch are a lot less than the chances of you being hit by a punch by standing static. And one of the things we'd have in Aikido that sets us apart, as I said earlier, is this entering turning scenario. So as you said, the flailing arm with the boxer, if the boxer stands, gets his guard up, throws that nice hook or that cross, smacks him in the head and still gets hit. Now, I've also seen that applied to karate. I could also see that applied to a lot of things. But within an Aikido element, just like the grappler, one of the things Osensei was quoted on, and I can't remember what book it was in, is that you should be at the centre of a whirlwind. You should never be standing in one place. You should always be moving, which reflect. I'm trying to remember what book that's in now. I think it's in Budo. It's certainly in one of his doka that he wrote about, from a stable centre, moving circularly. It's there. Everything's in there. But again, when you look at modern Aikido, nothing's happening on target, and it's all happening. Your opponent's not trying to hit you. The attack is coming for you to intercept with your hand and effect out there at the extension of the arm. At no point do I rarely see attacks that are designed to hit someone in the head, and then they have to adjust their body, or they're going to get smacked in the face. And a lot of the guys in my club have got a wee bit of a reputation for doing that at courses. Because that's how we train. If you're going to hit me, don't extend your arm for my hand to hit and intercept. Actually come for me and we'll deal with it. And as Aikidoka, we should be able to turn and rotate. So even if we do have flailing arms, we're either moving closer to it before it gets full impact, or we're moving in the opposite direction from it, away from that point of impact. So when we do movements, for example, even just intercepting up with basic, open-handed, an interception for Ikkyo, that right hand can also be a strike at the same time. We're either moving inside the attack or round the side of the attack. And it's one of those few martial arts that actually accomplishes that quite well. That and wrestling, where you get immediately inside the arm of the attack, and those flailing arms are just going to flop over the top of you.
Right.
As you pick someone up. And once you break inside that guard, particularly for the big flailing attacks and the big swinging kicks, they're absolutely no danger to you at all. In fact, they're more dangerous to the person flailing them, because you're moving with your body mass forward into a wild swing, which is actually going to cause more damage to them more likely than it is to you. Because once that if I move my 17-stone bulk forward and somebody throws a punch and it hits the side of my shoulder while I've got 17 stone coming forward, that's going to hurt. That's not going to hurt me. That's going to hurt them. I'll be bruised in the morning, but they're going to feel that way more than I am in that moment, particularly if I'm moving in to do something nasty.
Right. One of the things too, if you could put it in the top 5, probably in the top 3 principles of hoplology, it's a moving target is harder to hit. And I think that's universal. Any target that's sitting still, whether you're shooting archery or, firearms, throwing a rock, hitting with a fist, anything that's not moving is going to be a lot easier to hit. So why not just stay moving? And it's not like you got to be running or the target's got to be moving super fast, but with any movement of any target, it's much more complex now to match the timing, match the trajectory, match, all of those things. It gets to be a lot harder. So, I remember when I was doing my contact fighting, it also occurred to me too, not only is it a benefit to stay moving, but if you want to start moving to initiate, you hide movement in movement. So if you're totally still, and then you start to move, your opponent's going to see that right away. But if you're always moving around and they're just used to watching you moving, and now you move forward, you can get much farther without them even noticing, just because, well, he's just always moving around. I just don't know where. So there's a lot to that constant movement, almost like a shark, always going through the water, always having, water going through his gills, because he breathes, always he's not panicked, but he's always moving. I think that's a fundamental, and this is a principle that applies to striking, grappling, you name it. If you're standing still, you're much more vulnerable. And, I've heard the arguments of, well, you want to pose a particular target because you want that incoming strike to target where you're going to be, so that now you can hit it. However, that's also gambling on you're fast enough, and you're presuming that you're going to see it, read it, and there's no deception, there's no feints, there's no misdirection. I mean, there's a whole lot of stuff in there that's going to be a risk, because you don't know.
I often, and I don't mean any disrespect to anyone when they say this, is that anyone who says, I usually find that someone who's never actually been in a genuine conflict most of the time, because nobody I know, I've had guys on courses and training say, right, drop your hands and present a big target. I'm like, you want me to present a target of my face to that man's fist? I'm going to allow him to think he can hit me here, but you're going to do this and surprise him. I'm like, oh, right, okay, right, okay. So I present a target and they take the target. I often find that in those types of engagements, people don't think rationally. So I drop my hands and present a target, and while I'm waiting for that, the southpaw comes in and smacks me in the side of my head. Down I go. Well, nobody saw that coming. Most people don't pull their hand. Contrary to popular belief, very few people do this when they go to hit you. They'll maybe make some threatening movements, but a lot of punches just kind of come at you very fast. It's there's a lot of kind of myth I see taught in courses about how you can defend yourself and present a target here, and even in karate tournaments, I used to get told, double feint to the face, then go to the body, and I could never work out why it didn't work until I realised the threat isn't there. It was only when I stopped trying to do double feint and started to punch them twice in the face that they could pick up that intent. And by doing that motion, then I could draw them in because they wanted to counter me. So in fact, making a bigger target of myself, dropping my hands to draw somebody in for a face strike, actually, I think works on a subliminal kind of instinctual, why are you putting your hands down there? I don't really want to hit that. I don't really want to attack there. It's like...
I sense a trap.
I sense a trap. It's a trap. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, basically, nobody wants to do that. And it's, unless they're, very intoxicated, very stupid, in which case it's a big flailing punch that's going to come in anyway.
Sure.
And it doesn't matter what you do. You could be standing with, a metal headpiece on, a knight's helmet, and still try and bloody punch in the head because they're not thinking straight. Yeah, so it's interesting, and I have challenged that before on a couple of courses I've been to. Is that, well, why would you want to make a target of your face?
Right.
It's of all the places you can get hit with a punch, the head is the last thing you want. And I was told, oh, but that's the draw. It's the quick takedown. And to which I replied, well, that's interesting because in order to track a punch to the head, an opponent has to control their strike from the moment of commencement right through the whole tracking process. Their brain has to process this, and they have to have the confidence to throw that punch dead on target within millimeters to make it effective. And all you have to do is that, and it goes off. They miss. So the head is not as tempting a target. When they talk about this, bring your hands up, make a target of your stomach. Actually, I was on a course. Right? The guy's got a knife, so bring your hands up and make a target of your stomach. Fuck off! No, no, I'm not wanting a gut shot with a blade. Thanks very much. Why would we want to do that? So he goes for the strike. I'm like, oh dear, yeah. Makes you wonder.
Yeah, it does. Well, this has been a great conversation. I think we've been going about 90 minutes. So
oh, wow.
We could just keep talking all afternoon or evening, I'm sure. So is there anything you wanted to kind of wrap up with in terms of Aikido and training with grappling?
Well, just anyone listening, folks, if you get the chance to do it, go and do it. Try and engage with some grappling arts. Get out there and meet some BJJ guys. Preferably get some wrestlers because they'll teach you stuff you didn't even know you needed to know. And just have some fun with it. Don't be afraid to get back to, back to basics and just look at yourself from a perspective of, is there gaps in my training? Is there gaps in how I apply my Aikido, and how can I fill those gaps? I'm not saying fill it with wrestling. I'm saying find out how your Aikido in you is weak, because we're all different. That's the most important thing. Some people will be shy of accepting strikes. Some people will be shy of accepting grapples. Just get out there and do what you can and make the most of your Aikido for you, because every single person's Aikido is very individual and very different. And we need to learn to apply it to ourselves. And that's something I can never express that enough, is that how we train is very individualistic. We'll have our own sets of forms, we'll have our own particular way of standing, we'll have our own particular way of moving, and we have to make it work for ourselves. So, don't worry about what everybody else is doing with theirs. Get out there, experience more stuff, and I guarantee you, as long as you go at it with an open mind and look at how it can improve your Aikido can only get better.
Absolutely. And I hope if anything is taken away from our discussion, is that really Aikido is a grappling art. It's a standing grappling art. There's a lot that you can play with in learning about grappling without just having to sprawl on the ground and have, be tangling around with people that way. I find that it's easy to look at grappling as just being, groundwork, which can be kind of miserable. Like you were saying, you're dealing with a lot of weight, a lot of muscle, a lot of strength. But there's more to the grappling realm than that. And so we Aikido people are part of that realm, just a portion of it. Just expand your portion, get comfortable with more opportunity. And it is a blast to learn. I really enjoy it.
And also, just to point out, it's not a one-way street here, because when we use techniques like the kind of unbendable arm, the kind of heavy body style stuff that we do as well, and some of the techniques that we utilize, a lot of the guys that we would train with, I know a lot of guys in BJJ have said, I've learned a hell of a lot from you. I didn't realize that was an option for me there until you twisted my arm. And all I did was rotate their arm 180 degrees. It didn't occur to them that that could happen, and then it allowed them to combat that themselves. So it's a two-way street, and it's important that we remember that, is that when we engage with other martial arts, we've got a lot to offer. But I think we tend to feel a bit shy about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not about modesty. It's just like, I think there's been a recent movement. I think people are almost ashamed that they do Aikido sometimes, and they don't want to talk about it, and they don't want to show what it can do. There's a lot of martial arts out there can benefit from the skills we've got, particularly from a standing perspective. Tenkan movement, how to drop your body. Suwari Waza movement, really good for guys who do groundwork grapple, because it helps them get used to moving with a stable base. This is groundbreaking for some of these guys. They've never seen it before. So don't be afraid to share your skills, and that'll raise the profile of Aikido in the community as well.
It's funny because that's going on. I've seen multiple videos now of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu people teaching on YouTube wrist locks like Nikkios and Sankyos, and they love them, but they'll never mention that they came from Aikido. They'll never mention it in a million years. But they can appreciate the effectiveness and how that it works. It's a little disappointing that it's got so many technical problems with it, but I do applaud the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu community for understanding things that work and adapting them, even if they somewhat begrudgingly, kind of like they did with leg locks. I heard that they went through sort of that thing with the wrestlers, that they initially hated them, and then they realized they were effective. Like, well, maybe we should kind of learn a few of these, and they warm up to it after time. But it's funny. But so Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu people, I see you out there. I know you're doing it. I know you're stealing Aikido stuff and you don't want to admit it, but it's still funny. So, well, thank you very much, Stephen. This has been yet another great conversation. I was looking forward to this one. I'm glad we were able to hook up and get it to happen. So,
it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you very much. And for everybody else, until next time, another great discussion. Enjoy your training.
Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this discussion. Stay tuned for more episodes. I've got some great stuff on the way very soon. In the meantime, enjoy your training.